The laughter of children echoed through Sunnyside Park, a vibrant oasis nestled in the heart of Millbrook. Swings creaked rhythmically, slides gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the merry-go-round spun with gleeful abandon. Among the joyous cacophony, 8-year-old Zoe Thompson's giggles rang out like bells, her bright eyes sparkling as she chased butterflies near the sandbox. Her intricate cornrows, adorned with colorful beads, caught the sunlight, a crown of innocence and joy. Nearby, her parents, Dr. Marcus Thompson and Amara Thompson, sat on a weathered wooden bench. Marcus, a skilled cardiothoracic surgeon, had hands that could mend the most fragile of hearts. Amara, a civil rights attorney with a fierce reputation, carried the weight of countless battles for justice. Together, they were a picture of strength and love, their watchful eyes following Zoe's every move. Yet, beneath their pride lay an unspoken tension, a quiet understanding of the world's dangers, especially for a family like theirs. The park's serenity masked an undercurrent of unease. Officer James Rollins, a veteran of the Millbrook Police Department, lingered at the park's edge. His gaze was sharp, his presence heavy. To the casual observer, he was just another officer on patrol. But to those who knew better, his reputation preceded him, an enforcer of order whose actions often blurred the line between duty and prejudice. Rollins carried more than a badge, he carried a legacy of systemic bias, a shadow that darkened his every decision. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the playground, the fragile piece of the day began to fracture. A moment of misunderstanding, or perhaps something far more insidious, would set events into motion that no one could foresee. Zoe's laughter, so full of life, would soon be silenced, replaced by the kind of pain that ripples far beyond its epicenter. The Thompson family's world was about to collide with forces they had long fought to shield Zoe from. But Millbrook was not as quiet as it seemed. Beneath its surface, a network of unseen guardians stirred. These were individuals who operated in the shadows, wielding influence that extended beyond the confines of the town. They were watchers and protectors, not bound by the limitations of law but driven by a moral compass that pointed unerringly toward justice. For years, they had worked silently, dismantling the systems that allowed injustice to thrive. And now, with Zoe at the center of a growing storm, they prepared to act. As night fell, the town held its breath. Plans unfolded in whispers, encrypted messages flashed across unseen channels, and a sleek black SUV glided through the streets. Inside sat figures whose identities were unknown to the public but whose resolve was unshakable. They did not come with weapons or uniforms but with the power to expose, to confront, and to demand accountability. Their arrival marked the beginning of a reckoning, one that would challenge the very fabric of Millbrook's institutions. By dawn, the town's quiet streets would be forever changed. The Thompson family's anguish, Rollins' choices, and the actions of those who refused to stand by would converge in a moment of truth. What began as an ordinary day in Sunnyside Park would become the catalyst for a battle over justice, equality, and the soul of a community. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the town, the stage was set for a confrontation that would echo far beyond Millbrook's borders. The story unfolds in Etheris, a sprawling world suspended in an endless sky, where floating islands drift amidst shimmering clouds. Each island boasts unique ecosystems, from lush jungles teeming with bioluminescent flora to arid deserts carved by ancient winds. The skies are alive with airships and winged creatures, while the ground below remains shrouded in mystery, known only as the Veil, a forbidden expanse no one dares to explore. Kale, a skilled but impulsive skyship pilot, seeks redemption after a tragic accident destroyed his former crew. Haunted by guilt, he's driven to prove his worth and uncover the truth about the Veil. Opposite him is Lyra, a reserved cartographer with a mysterious past, who joins Kale's crew in search of a legendary artifact said to rewrite the laws of Etheris. Her calm demeanor hides a fierce determination to protect her secrets at all costs. The crew also includes Jorin, a mechanic with a prosthetic arm powered by rare crystals, and Ira, a sharp-tongued navigator with an uncanny ability to read the ever-changing skies. Jorin's loyalty to Kale stems from a shared history of hardship, while Ira's motivations remain enigmatic, though her sharp wit often masks a deep fear of failure. The island's inhabitants are as diverse as the landscapes, from nomadic traders who glide between the islands on wind-powered skiffs to reclusive monks guarding ancient ruins. Political tensions simmer between rival factions vying for control of the skies, adding layers of danger to the crew's journey. Whispers of rebellion against the Sky Council, the ruling body of Etheris, further complicate their quest. Kale and Lyra's uneasy alliance is tested as they navigate treacherous skies and unravel the mysteries of the Veil. Each character's motivations and secrets gradually intertwine, revealing a deeper connection to the world's hidden truths. Together, they must confront not only external threats but also the shadows of their own pasts. The black SUV's arrival at Officer Rollins' home marked the beginning of an unrelenting storm. Inside, a covert team armed with irrefutable evidence prepared to dismantle the facade of justice shielding systemic rot. As Millbrook stirred awake, whispers of rebellion grew louder, and the Thompson family's silent anguish ignited a reckoning that would expose truths too long buried. The small coastal town of Larkhaven bustled with its usual charm, but for Emma, a struggling marine biologist, it was a place of mounting pressure. She had returned to her hometown to spearhead a project aimed at saving the endangered coral reefs nearby. Her goal was clear: secure funding for her research and rally the community to support the cause. However, her initial obstacle came in the form of skeptical townsfolk, many of whom prioritized the booming fishing industry over environmental concerns. Among them was her childhood friend, Lucas, now a pragmatic fisherman whose livelihood depended on the waters Emma sought to protect. Emma's determination clashed with Lucas's practicality, but their shared history made their disagreements layered with unspoken emotions. As they argued over the future of the reefs, old memories surfaced, revealing a bond neither had fully let go of. Meanwhile, Emma's younger brother, Max, a tech-savvy but reclusive programmer, reluctantly joined her efforts. His subplot intertwined with Emma's as he worked to develop a data system to track reef health, all while grappling with his own insecurities about stepping into the spotlight. As Emma sought allies, she encountered Dr. Elena Morales, a passionate but disillusioned scientist who had abandoned similar projects in the past. Elena's reluctance to help added another hurdle, forcing Emma to prove her commitment and rekindle Elena's belief in change. At the same time, Lucas faced his own challenges when a rival fishing company began overharvesting, threatening not only the reefs but also his family's business. This unexpected twist pushed Lucas and Emma closer, as both realized their goals might not be as incompatible as they seemed. The dynamics between the characters deepened as Emma's persistence began to sway the town's opinion. She organized a community meeting, but tensions flared when Lucas's father, a respected elder, voiced his doubts about her plans. Emma's frustration grew, but Max's quiet encouragement reminded her to stay focused. In a surprising turn, Lucas offered to help Emma gather evidence of the reef's decline, though he made it clear he wasn't fully convinced. Their uneasy alliance hinted at a growing understanding between them. As the project gained momentum, Emma discovered an unexpected ally in Mia, a high school student passionate about marine life. Mia's subplot brought fresh energy to the story, as her youthful enthusiasm inspired both Emma and Max. However, Mia's overzealous actions led to a minor mishap, creating a ripple of doubt within the team. This incident tested their trust in one another, but it also highlighted their shared commitment to the cause. By the end of this initial phase, Emma's resolve had strengthened, though the obstacles ahead loomed larger than ever. The relationships she was rebuilding and the new ones she was forming became the foundation of her fight, setting the stage for a journey that would challenge not only her goals but also the bonds that tied them all together. The morning began like any other in the quiet town, with its residents moving through their routines, unaware of the storm about to break. As the sun crept over the horizon, a deafening explosion shattered the tranquility, sending shockwaves through the streets. Smoke billowed from the town square, where the once pristine clock tower now stood in ruins. People rushed from their homes, faces etched with confusion and fear, as the air filled with the acrid scent of burning wood and stone. Among the crowd, Emma froze, her heart hammering. She had spent years documenting the town's history, and the clock tower was its centerpiece, a symbol of unity and resilience. The destruction wasn't random, it was deliberate. A crumpled note fluttered near the wreckage, its ominous message scrawled in red ink, "This is only the beginning." The words sent a chill down her spine, but it also sparked a fire within her. Someone wanted to tear the town apart, and she couldn't stand idly by. Meanwhile, across town, Liam, a reclusive mechanic, was jolted awake by the explosion. For years, he had avoided the outside world, burying himself in his workshop and his grief. But as the ground trembled beneath him, he knew this was no ordinary accident. His instincts, honed during his time in the military, screamed danger. He grabbed his tools and stepped outside, his resolve hardening. He had promised himself he'd never get involved again, but the town had once been his sanctuary. He couldn't ignore its cry for help. As chaos unfolded, the mayor struggled to maintain order, her voice cracking as she addressed the frightened crowd. Rumors spread like wildfire, some whispered of sabotage, others of a long-forgotten feud resurfacing. Emma pushed through the throng, determined to uncover the truth. She locked eyes with Liam, who had just arrived, his presence commanding attention. Though strangers, their shared determination was evident. They exchanged a brief nod, an unspoken agreement forming between them. The town's routine was irreparably disrupted, its people gripped by fear and uncertainty. But for Emma and Liam, the destruction of the clock tower was more than a tragedy, it was a call to action. They had no choice but to confront the unknown forces at play, even if it meant risking everything. The clock tower's fall wasn't just the end of an era, it was the start of a battle for the town's survival. The laughter of children had faded into the cool stillness of the evening, but Sunnyside Park bore the weight of an unspoken tension. A single butterfly, wings illuminated by the last rays of sunlight, fluttered near the sandbox where Zoe Thompson had played just hours before. The park, once a haven of innocence, now seemed haunted by the echoes of something far darker. Across town, in a dimly lit office cluttered with case files and half-empty coffee cups, Amara Thompson sat staring at her phone. Her usually steady hands trembled as she scrolled through a flood of messages and missed calls. The incident at the park had already begun to ripple outward, drawing the attention of activists, journalists, and even old allies from her days as a law student fighting for systemic reform. Amara's mind raced with questions. How could this happen? What would justice look like for her daughter? And most pressing of all, what kind of world would Zoe grow up in if nothing changed? Meanwhile, in a nondescript diner on the outskirts of Millbrook, a man in a gray hoodie sipped his coffee, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Known only by the alias Hawthorne, he was a key operative in an underground network dedicated to exposing corruption and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The encrypted message he'd received hours earlier had been brief but urgent, Millbrook. Officer Rollins. Innocent child targeted. Need immediate intervention. Hawthorne had seen countless cases of abuse and injustice, but something about this one felt different. Personal. He'd already begun assembling a team. Back at the Thompson household, Marcus Thompson paced the living room, his usually calm demeanor unraveling. His medical expertise couldn't mend the invisible wounds inflicted on his family, and the helplessness gnawed at him. He glanced at Zoe, who sat curled up on the couch, clutching her favorite stuffed bear. She was quiet now, her earlier giggles replaced by a silence that spoke volumes. Marcus knew that as a father, his role wasn't just to heal hearts in the operating room, but to shield his daughter from a world that too often sought to break them. As the night deepened, another figure entered the fray. Detective Elena Morales, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for uncovering uncomfortable truths, reviewed a file on Officer Rollins. She'd been assigned to the case after a tip-off from an anonymous source. Morales, a Latina officer who had fought her way through the ranks in a predominantly white department, understood the fine line between duty and complicity. She knew that pursuing this case could jeopardize her career, but her instincts told her this was a battle worth fighting. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Hawthorne," she said when the line connected. "I'm in." Elsewhere, in the shadows of Millbrook's affluent neighborhoods, whispers of the incident reached the ears of influential figures. Among them was Evelyn Carter, a retired judge who had spent decades quietly funding grassroots organizations aimed at dismantling systemic racism. Evelyn, now in her 70s, had seen the cycles of injustice repeat far too many times. She made a decision that night. It was time to step out of the shadows and leverage her connections to ensure this case wouldn't be buried under bureaucracy and excuses. As these disparate threads began to intertwine, the town of Millbrook unknowingly became a stage for a confrontation that would challenge not only its residents but the nation at large. The players were assembling, each driven by their own motivations, some seeking justice, others clinging to power, and a few simply trying to survive the storm. The question wasn't whether change was coming, it was whether Millbrook was ready for it. The laughter of children faded into the background as dusk settled over Sunnyside Park, the once vivid colors of the playground now muted under the amber glow of streetlights. Zoe Thompson, unaware of the storm brewing around her, clutched a dandelion she'd plucked from the grass, her innocent world still intact. But across the park, tension simmered. Officer James Rollins, his hand resting too casually on his holstered weapon, lingered near his patrol car, his gaze fixed on the Thompson family with an intensity that felt less like vigilance and more like a warning. Dr. Marcus Thompson's jaw tightened as he noticed Rollins' lingering stare. Years of navigating subtle and overt prejudice had sharpened his instincts, and this moment was no different. Amara, ever the strategist, placed a calming hand on Marcus's arm, her mind already racing through potential scenarios. She had faced countless adversaries in court, but this was different. This was personal. She glanced at Zoe, who was now skipping toward them, blissfully unaware of the tension crackling in the air. Meanwhile, across town, a separate drama unfolded. In the dimly lit basement of an unassuming bookstore, a group of individuals gathered around a table strewn with maps, documents, and laptops. Known only by their code names, they were part of an underground network dedicated to exposing corruption and safeguarding the vulnerable. Their leader, a woman with piercing gray eyes and a voice that commanded attention, tapped the table sharply. "We move tonight," she said, her tone leaving no room for debate. "The system has failed too many times. This time, we make them listen." As the group finalized their plans, the stakes became clear. This wasn't just about Zoe or the Thompson family. This was about exposing a pattern of unchecked power that had plagued Millbrook for generations. The network had unearthed damning evidence against Rollins, a trail of misconduct complaints, buried investigations, and a history of targeting minority communities. But they needed more than proof, they needed a public reckoning. Back at the Thompson home, the family's evening routine was disrupted by an unexpected knock at the door. Marcus and Amara exchanged wary glances before Marcus opened it to find a man in a tailored suit standing on their porch. He introduced himself as Samuel Hayes, a private investigator hired by an anonymous client. "Your family is in danger," he said bluntly, his tone devoid of pretense. "But you're not alone. There are people who want to help, if you'll let them." The revelation sent shockwaves through the household. Who were these mysterious allies? And what did they stand to gain? Amara's legal mind immediately sought answers, while Marcus wrestled with the instinct to protect his family at all costs. Zoe, sensing the unease in her parents, clung to her mother's side, her earlier joy replaced by quiet confusion. As the night deepened, the black SUV stationed outside Rollins' home became a silent sentinel. Inside, the team prepared for their next move, their resolve steeled by the knowledge of what was at stake. Each member carried their own scars, their own reasons for joining the fight. For some, it was personal loss. For others, it was a relentless pursuit of justice. Together, they formed a formidable force, one that operated outside the constraints of bureaucracy and fear. The first crack in Rollins' facade came when he stepped outside to retrieve his morning paper and noticed the SUV. His initial bravado faltered as he realized the vehicle hadn't moved all night. By the time he sat down to his breakfast, his phone buzzed with an anonymous message, *, "We know what you've done. The truth is coming." As the clock ticked toward noon, the tension in Millbrook reached a boiling point. News of the previous evening's events had begun to spread, whispers turning into murmurs, and murmurs into outrage. Community leaders, activists, and concerned citizens rallied together, their voices demanding accountability. The Thompson family, once reluctant to step into the spotlight, found themselves at the center of a movement far larger than they could have imagined. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon once more, Millbrook was a town transformed. The confrontation between Rollins and the network was no longer a matter of if, but when. And as the players moved into position, one thing became clear: this was no longer just a fight for justice. It was a battle for the soul of a community, a reckoning that would force everyone, from the Thompsons to Rollins to the shadowy network, to confront their own truths and decide which side of history they would stand on. The morning after the incident at Sunnyside Park, the Thompson household was cloaked in a heavy silence, the kind that settles when fear and anger intertwine. Marcus paced the living room, his hands clenched into fists, while Amara sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open and her fingers flying over the keyboard. She was drafting a statement, not just as a mother but as an attorney who understood the stakes of what had transpired. Zoe, usually a bundle of energy, sat quietly on the couch, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, her bright eyes now shadowed by confusion and unease. Meanwhile, the black SUV that had appeared outside Officer Rollins' home the previous night had not gone unnoticed. Neighbors peeked through curtains, their curiosity piqued by the presence of the unmarked vehicle and the individuals who emerged from it. Dressed in sharp, unassuming suits, they moved with purpose, their expressions unreadable. One of them, a woman with piercing green eyes and a calm but commanding demeanor, carried a slim briefcase. Her name was Elise Monroe, a strategist for a covert organization known only to a select few. This group operated in the gray spaces of society, where traditional systems of justice often failed. As Rollins opened his front door, coffee mug in hand, he froze at the sight of Elise and her team standing on his porch. She greeted him with a polite but icy smile, her words measured and deliberate. "Officer Rollins, we need to talk." The conversation that followed was anything but polite. Elise presented him with a dossier, its contents meticulously compiled, body camera footage, eyewitness accounts, and a timeline that left no room for misinterpretation. Rollins' face paled as he realized the depth of their knowledge. "You've made a grave error," Elise said, her voice low but firm. "And now, you'll face the consequences." Back at the park, whispers of the previous day's events began to spread. Parents exchanged hushed conversations, their eyes darting toward the sandbox where Zoe had played. The community, long divided by unspoken tensions, was now on the brink of confrontation. Some rallied behind the Thompsons, their outrage palpable, while others clung to denial, unwilling to believe that one of their own could be capable of such prejudice. As the day unfolded, Amara's statement went live, quickly gaining traction on social media. It wasn't just a recounting of events but a call to action, a demand for accountability and systemic change. Her words resonated far beyond Millbrook, drawing the attention of activists, journalists, and even lawmakers. Marcus, though reluctant to step into the spotlight, joined his wife in addressing the growing media presence outside their home. His voice, steady but tinged with emotion, spoke to the universal fear of every parent, the inability to protect their child from a world that too often judges them by the color of their skin. By evening, the tension in Millbrook was palpable. Protesters began to gather outside the police station, their signs and chants growing louder as the hours passed. Inside, the department was in disarray, scrambling to contain the fallout. Rollins, now under investigation, found himself increasingly isolated, his colleagues torn between loyalty and self-preservation. As the sun set, Elise and her team convened in a nondescript office on the outskirts of town. The room was filled with maps, documents, and screens displaying live feeds from the park, the Thompson household, and the police station. "This isn't just about one officer or one family," Elise said, addressing her team. "This is about dismantling a system that allows this to happen. And we'll start here, in Millbrook." The night ended with a series of coordinated actions. Encrypted emails were sent to key media outlets, anonymous tips were delivered to federal investigators, and plans were laid for a community forum to amplify the voices of those who had long been silenced. For the Thompsons, the fight had only just begun. For Millbrook, the days ahead promised to be a reckoning. And for Officer Rollins, the weight of his decisions would soon become unbearable. As the town braced for what was to come, one thing was certain: the laughter of children in Sunnyside Park would never sound the same again. The morning after the incident at Sunnyside Park, Millbrook stirred with an uneasy calm, as if the town itself sensed the tremors of what was to come. The Thompson household was a fortress of worry and determination. Amara paced the living room, her phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated with allies from her network of civil rights advocates. Marcus, usually the embodiment of composure, sat at the dining table, his hands clasped tightly as he stared at Zoe's untouched breakfast plate. Zoe, for her part, remained quiet, her usual effervescence dimmed by the weight of the previous day's events. At the police station, Officer Rollins filed his report with a casual indifference, his words carefully chosen to paint a picture of authority and control. Yet, beneath his stoic exterior, a flicker of unease gnawed at him. He had heard whispers, rumors of a group that operated in the shadows, exposing corruption and dismantling the systems that enabled it. Dismissing the thought, he convinced himself that his badge and the institution it represented would shield him from any repercussions. Meanwhile, across town, the black SUV from the night before had moved to a discreet location. Inside, a diverse group of individuals reviewed the evidence collected from the park. Among them was Elena Reyes, a seasoned investigative journalist whose exposés had toppled corrupt officials, and Malik Carter, a former FBI agent turned whistleblower. They were joined by a tech prodigy known only as Cypher, whose skills in digital forensics were unmatched. Each had their reasons for joining the cause, but all shared a common goal: to dismantle the structures of oppression that had allowed people like Rollins to act with impunity. As the team pieced together their strategy, alliances began to form. Elena and Malik, despite their differing approaches, found common ground in their shared disdain for injustice. Cypher, however, remained an enigma, her motivations unclear even to her closest collaborators. Trust was a fragile commodity within the group, and the stakes left no room for error. Back at the Thompson home, a breakthrough came in the form of a video. A bystander at the park had captured the entire incident on their phone, and the footage was damning. It showed Rollins confronting Zoe without cause, his demeanor escalating from authoritative to aggressive as Marcus and Amara intervened. The video ended with Zoe's terrified cries, a sound that would haunt anyone who heard it. Amara immediately sent the footage to her contacts, knowing it could serve as both a weapon and a shield. By midday, the first ripples of the brewing storm reached Millbrook's residence. Social media lit up with the video, accompanied by hashtags demanding justice for Zoe. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon, national networks began to take notice. The town's mayor, an opportunist with an eye on re-election, issued a carefully worded statement condemning the incident while pledging a thorough investigation. Behind closed doors, however, he scrambled to contain the fallout, fearing what further scrutiny might uncover about Millbrook's police department. As tensions rose, unexpected alliances began to form. Reverend Elijah Brooks, a prominent figure in Millbrook's black community, reached out to the Thompsons, offering both spiritual and practical support. At the same time, a young rookie officer named Danielle Harper wrestled with her conscience. Having witnessed Rollins' behavior firsthand, she faced a choice: remain silent and protect her career, or come forward and risk everything to tell the truth. By evening, the Black SUV's team had finalized their plan. They would release not only the video but also a trove of documents exposing systemic corruption within the Millbrook Police Department. Cypher had uncovered years of falsified reports, discriminatory practices, and evidence tampering, all of which painted a damning picture. The team knew that their actions would make them targets, but the stakes were too high to back down. As the sun set, casting Millbrook in a crimson glow, the stage was fully set. The Thompsons braced for the battle ahead, their resolve unshaken despite the odds. The Black SUV's team prepared to strike, knowing that their actions would reverberate far beyond the borders of the small town. And Officer Rollins, oblivious to the storm gathering around him, sat in his living room, the faint sound of protesters beginning to echo in the distance. The first domino had fallen, and there was no turning back. What began as a single act of injustice was about to ignite a movement, one that would challenge not only Millbrook but the very fabric of a nation grappling with its own identity. The morning after the park incident, the Thompson household was cloaked in a heavy silence. Amara sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open but untouched, her hands gripping a steaming mug of coffee. Marcus stood by the window, his jaw tight as he stared out at the street, replaying the events of the previous day in his mind. Zoe, oblivious to the gravity of what had transpired, hummed softly to herself as she colored at the living room table. But the tension in the air was palpable, an invisible weight pressing down on them all. Across town, Officer Rollins was beginning to feel the first ripples of unease. His routine morning briefing at the station had been interrupted by an unusual number of calls from higher-ups. Whispers of inquiries and complaints filtered through the precinct, and Rollins couldn't shake the feeling that his actions at the park had drawn more attention than he'd anticipated. Yet, his arrogance remained intact, bolstered by years of impunity. He dismissed the growing unease as nothing more than noise, confident that his badge would shield him from any real consequences. Meanwhile, in a nondescript office building on the outskirts of Millbrook, a team of operatives worked with quiet precision. This was no ordinary group, they were part of a clandestine organization known only to a select few. Their mission was clear: to expose corruption, dismantle systems of oppression, and protect those who could not protect themselves. The incident at Sunnyside Park had triggered their involvement, and now, every piece of evidence, every angle of the story, was being meticulously gathered. Surveillance footage, eyewitness accounts, and Rollins' troubling history within the department were compiled into an unassailable case. As the day wore on, Amara's resolve hardened. She had spent her career fighting for justice, but this time, the battle was personal. She began making calls, rallying allies, and preparing for a legal and public relations offensive. Marcus, though more reserved by nature, found his own way to channel his anger. He reached out to colleagues in the medical field, leveraging their networks to amplify the story. Together, they formed a united front, determined to ensure that Zoe's laughter would never again be silenced by fear. By late afternoon, the first signs of the storm began to break. Social media lit up with posts about the incident, fueled by a leaked video that captured Rollins' actions in the park. The footage, grainy but damning, spread like wildfire, accompanied by hashtags demanding accountability. News outlets picked up the story, and within hours, Millbrook found itself at the center of a national conversation. Protests were organized, and the town square became a gathering place for those demanding change. As night fell, Rollins' confidence began to waver. The black SUV that had been parked outside his home all day was a silent reminder that this time, things might be different. Inside, the operatives reviewed their final plans, their expressions grim but resolute. They knew the risks they were taking, but they also knew the stakes. This wasn't just about one officer or one family. It was about dismantling a system that allowed such injustices to occur in the first place. In the Thompson home, Zoe climbed into bed, her beads clicking softly as she nestled under the covers. Marcus and Amara took turns tucking her in, their hearts heavy but their determination unshaken. As they turned off the light and closed her door, they exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They were ready for the fight ahead, no matter how long or arduous it might be. The pieces were in place, the players poised for action. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Millbrook braced itself for the reckoning to come. The laughter of children had been silenced for a moment, but the echoes of that joy, and the fight to protect it, would soon roar louder than ever. The laughter of children faded, replaced by a tense silence that gripped Sunnyside Park. Zoe Thompson was safe, but the events of the previous evening had left scars on Millbrook that would not easily heal. The black SUV's arrival at Officer Rollins' home had set off a chain reaction, one that culminated in an explosive confrontation outside the police precinct. By midday, the town square was packed with residents, their voices rising in solidarity, demanding accountability and systemic change. Inside the precinct, Rollins sat in an interrogation room, his confidence crumbling under the weight of irrefutable evidence. The network that had arrived in Millbrook had done more than confront him. They had uncovered years of misconduct, hidden complaints, and a pattern of abuse that could no longer be ignored. Files were delivered to the mayor's office, local journalists, and national media outlets, ensuring that the truth would not be buried. Rollins' badge, once a symbol of authority, now lay discarded on the table, a relic of a broken system. For the Thompsons, the ordeal was both a nightmare and a turning point. Amara Thompson stood before the gathered crowd, her voice steady and resolute as she called for justice not just for her daughter, but for every family that had suffered in silence. "This is not just about Zoe," she declared. "This is about every child who deserves to grow up without fear, every parent who deserves to feel their child is safe, and every community that deserves better." The town's response was swift and decisive. The police chief, under mounting pressure, announced a full investigation into the department's practices, while community leaders formed a civilian oversight board to ensure transparency moving forward. The network that had orchestrated Rollins' downfall quietly stepped back, their mission complete, but their presence lingered in the form of a renewed sense of purpose among Millbrook's residents. Zoe, unaware of the full scope of what had transpired, returned to the park days later, her laughter once again filling the air. Her parents watched her play, their hearts heavy but hopeful. They knew the road ahead would be long, but they also knew they were not alone. The events in Millbrook had sparked a national conversation, one that could not be silenced. This is a moment to reflect, to act, and to demand better for the future. The story of Millbrook is a reminder that change is possible when communities come together, when truth is wielded as a weapon, and when we refuse to accept injustice as the status quo. Stand up, speak out, and be part of the movement for a brighter, more just tomorrow. The fight is far from over, but it begins with each of us. The laughter of children returned to Sunnyside Park weeks after the events that shook Millbrook to its core. The swings creaked once more, the slides gleamed under the sun, and the merry-go-round spun with renewed joy. Yet, the park now carried an unspoken weight, a reminder of the confrontation that had forced a town, and eventually a nation, to confront its darkest truths. Zoe Thompson, safe and smiling, played near the sandbox, her colorful beads catching the sunlight. But her parents, Marcus and Amara, watched her with a new resolve, their vigilance sharper, their mission clearer. The reckoning that began with Officer Rollins had unraveled a web of corruption and bias within the Millbrook Police Department. Evidence, meticulously gathered and strategically released, had left no room for denial. Rollins resigned in disgrace, his actions condemned not only by the community but by his own peers. The black SUV's arrival that fateful morning had set off a chain reaction. Testimonies, whistleblowers, and public outcry followed like dominoes. The town's leadership, long complicit in maintaining the status quo, found themselves under scrutiny. Change was no longer a distant hope but an urgent demand. For the Thompsons, the ordeal had been a crucible. Marcus, once content to save lives in the operating room, began advocating for healthcare equity in underserved communities. Amara, already a formidable attorney, expanded her focus to include police reform, partnering with grassroots organizations to push for accountability measures. Together, they became a symbol of resilience and the power of action in the face of adversity. Their voices, amplified by the network that had intervened to protect Zoe, reached far beyond Millbrook, sparking conversations in towns and cities across the country. As for the shadowy group that had orchestrated the exposure of Rollins, their work continued quietly. They left no trace, no names, only the undeniable impact of their actions. Their mission was not to be celebrated but to ensure that justice prevailed where systems had failed. They were a reminder that while institutions may falter, individuals can still rise to challenge injustice. Their intervention in Millbrook was but one chapter in a larger, ongoing fight, a fight that demanded vigilance, courage, and the willingness to act when others turned away. The events in Millbrook served as a turning point, a catalyst for change that rippled outward. Policies were re-examined, training programs overhauled, and community dialogues initiated. Yet, the work was far from over. The scars of systemic racism ran deep, and progress required persistence. The story of Zoe Thompson and her family became a rallying cry, a testament to the power of truth and the necessity of standing up against oppression. As the sun set over Sunnyside Park, casting a golden glow over the playground, Zoe released a butterfly she had caught in her small hands. It fluttered upward, free and unburdened, a fitting symbol of hope and resilience. The laughter of children filled the air once more, a reminder of what was at stake, their innocence, their future, and the promise of a world where they could play without fear. The question now is this: what role will you play in ensuring that such a world becomes a reality? Change begins with awareness but thrives through action. Speak out, educate yourself, and support those on the front lines of justice. The fight for equality is not a moment but a movement, and it requires all of us to move forward together. Let Millbrook's story inspire you to act, for the future of our children depends on the choices we make today.